Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first edition of Epicenter Live. I mean, it's live, it's kind of live. I mean, it's live because we're doing it in front of you guys. It's not live streamed or anything like that. But it will be released on the feed in the next couple of days, probably next week. So, you know, we wanted to do this because, you know, for the first time in a while, most of us, at least, were going to be here at the event. Unfortunately, Felica could not be here because of other engagements. But this is something that I think we would like to continue doing when we travel to events. So we already have plans to do this perhaps in the next few months. So it's very much experimental. And the way that we'll be doing this is, and we've got a couple list of topics here that we want to cover, and we want to leave it open to you guys also to interact, ask questions, comment. You know, we don't have all the answers or all the knowledge. A lot of the knowledge is also in this room. So there is a mic going around. So if you have anything to say or anything to comment on during this discussion, just raise your hand, get the mic, and intervene. So for those who don't know Epicenter, Epicenter has been in the space for over 5 years. Obviously, we're a podcast. And you have 4 of the hosts here on stage today. So Mihir Roy, Aggarwal, Fabian, Crain, and myself, Sébastien Couture, and the 5th host, Fabian, who would be here. Just before we get started, a couple disclaimers. Obviously, as most of you know, a lot of people here on this stage, all of us are atom holders. We also participate in various Cosmos projects or companies related to Cosmos, and Cosmos is also a sponsor of Epicenter. I just wanted to get that out there. If you didn't already know that. So, the first topic so the broad topic today is blockchain interoperability. We are here at the Interchain Conference. And so, the first thing that, maybe to get things started off, is sort of lay out the blockchain interoperability landscape. And so, today's event is obviously about Cosmos and the Interchain Foundation, but there are other projects out there, and within these projects, there are questions around how these projects will interoperate within themselves, but also amongst each other. So starting off, what is to you guys sort of the interoperability landscape look like outside of the projects being discussed here at this conference?
Okay, the 2 main interoperability projects that I'm particularly very interested in and I've been focused on is, the first is obviously Cosmos, and then the other is Interledger. And I think that these are these 2 are 2 of the examples on the 2 different spectrums of interoperability. So Cosmos, we're kind of talking about side chains kind of stuff, where we're moving assets between blockchains. And then the Interledger is kind of in that realm of atomic swaps like protocols, where the idea is, we're not trying to move assets between blockchains anymore. We're just trying to, I'm using one blockchain and you're using another blockchain. We want to send some value back and forth. I want to pay for, it's really only meant for payments. And so these 2 but it's only meant for payments, and it's much more limited in its capabilities, but it has much fewer restrictions, right? In Cosmos, we have this assumption that all these chains are going to implement IBC, and if not, we need to hack in IBC using peg zones. While Interledger has way fewer requirements on it, and so I gave a talk, and I think they're both really important and useful technologies. And I actually gave a talk at the Interledger Summit last month, kind of specifically on how these 2 pieces of things intermesh together and why they actually need to coexist to make. I think Interledger is actually a really important part of the Cosmos ecosystem.
Yeah, in one way that I think one can also think about the topic is, when Bitcoin came along in 2013, back then, 2011, 12, but people would talk a lot about, application you could build on Bitcoin, and you had some of these early things like Colored Coins, Mastercoin. And then, of course, with Ethereum, you had this alternative vision in that they say, okay, Bitcoin's too limited. We can have an alternative, this world computer, and in a way, there's very clearly a concept of interoperability in Ethereum, right? It's all the same machine, and contracts can call each other. And this kind of notion of Internet of Value has been around for a long time and kind of used in different contexts, right? Whether people have talked about it in the context of Bitcoin or Ethereum or maybe the Ripple guys. And I think today it seems pretty clear that that's not what the world's going to look like, but there's going to be lots and lots of different chains for lots of different purposes, controlled by different people in different places, evolving in different ways. And so then interoperability becomes something different, right? It becomes about how do all of those chains somehow interoperate and create this like internet of blockchains, right? And so I think interoperability today, I think is about figuring out how can different blockchains interact. And of course within that you also still have different visions. Something like Polkadot, which seems to be more, to me, like a continuation of the Ethereum vision, in that you say, okay, it's still kind of a world computer, at least at the lowest level, in sort of the security and the guarantees. But then, you can have sort of a sharded version and lots of different ones. And then a more, maybe more radically decentralized approaches, both Interledger and IBC would kind of count under that, where there's not like an inherent hierarchy and a concept of what this network topology is going to look like, but it's just about, okay, how can these different chains communicate with each other?
And I think another approach to interoperability is kind of the dark horse in the race, is that you see that there are these projects that are trying to build blockchains that can own private data. Right? So there's one project on Tendermint, Oasis, I think. There's Enigma. There's Crain. They're essentially using a bunch of different technologies, but you can have like this crypto network, and you can put data on that crypto network, and the data is confidential. And you can compute using the data, the confidential data that you've put on the crypto network. If that sort of thing is possible fundamentally, and it can be made secure, then what kind of data would you want to put on such a crypto network? Well, you might want to put your private key on such a crypto network. Right? So if I can have my Bitcoin private key on that crypto network and my Atom private key on that crypto network, and some other user, Brian, has their Bitcoin and Atom private key on that crypto network, then it also gives us maybe some way to interoperate. Because I could buy Brian's Bitcoin while giving up my Atom using a computation on that crypto network, because both of our keys are on that network. So that could be an alternative, but I think it's a dark horse. It may or may not be an important part of the interoperability space.
So for Brian, Arthur Brightman has this like quip. He says that all interoperability projects are just a veiled attempt at domination. Like even Cosmos said this is just like a veiled thing that we're saying, like interoperability, when really all we're trying to do is to make Cosmos Hub the chain. What do you think about that claim from him?
I'm sure different people have different, priority orders, and obviously people invest in holding atoms have, some economic interest in Cosmos Hub becoming significant. But I just think the way that IBC, let's say, is approached, and it doesn't, it doesn't prioritize Cosmos Hub, right? There's no particular role in it. So I would somewhat disagree. I mean, there's probably some truth to it as well, but I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you on the, I think the Cosmos design is kind of meant to not do that. And we've been trying our best to make sure we support multiple hubs right from the get-go. There's already the Iris hub, and we encourage more hubs to come in and try different things. different distributions, different whatnot. Yeah, and then, I mean, also I think the entire fact that, like, the atoms are not making any play for, like, money or anything, and that right there is kind of like forcing a lot of the value to go to the edges of the Cosmos network, not necessarily on the hub itself.
And what about interoperability then now between the different networks that, they attempt to dominance? So let's assume that, in some years, Cosmos has a several billion dollar market cap. You've got Polkadot also with, important dominance in the space, and like Ethereum 2.0 and maybe some other projects. At which point do we say, okay, now we need interoperability between those systems? Do we imagine now other blockchains sitting on top of those, providing interoperability between them, or can they be interoperable just between themselves with the protocols that they implement and sort of using similar types of protocols?
Yeah, I mean, basically you're just going to get them to implement IBC, and then, Polkadot will just be a hub in the Cosmos network.
Okay.
Like, same with Ethereum and whatnot, like, it's all just part of this Cosmos interchain, and yeah.
Okay.
I mean, like, we are working with some of the ETH 2.0 developers, like, Prismatic Labs and stuff, on, like, how we can integrate some of the features of IBC into, like, Ethereum 2.0 and whatnot. And then, with Polkadot, like, it's easy to, we can add an IBC adapter chain, like, as one of the pair chains can be an adapter, like an IBC adapter for connecting to the hub.
That brings me to the next point that I wanted to address here is the types of applications that different chains will attract. So if we're looking at sort of the Ethereum space, has been fundraising has been one of the major applications for that platform. We're seeing a lot of DeFi there. One of the things I noticed here at this event, at least, is that there seems to be like a couple of projects that are in like the social good space. So we've got like Regen Network. There's this Cello, and we saw a talk from the Open Money Initiative and everything that's going on there. And I myself and my friend will be working on a UBI project called Heartbeat. So, like, do you think that Cosmos maybe is a platform that will attract a lot of these types of projects, or are there specific types of applications that you think will sort of naturally come to the Cosmos hub?
I mean, I think, I don't know if the Cosmos is like particular, I don't think it has a particular feature that favor like social change applications, but I think the thing that is unique about Cosmos is the sovereignty of chains, right? So I think if you look at something like Binance chain, we can't really imagine that Binance would build a DEX as a pair chain or on Ethereum 2.0, right? Because they would want full control. So I think just anything that cares about like governance and sovereignty seems like very well suited for building kind of in this Cosmos paradigm. That might be, I mean, I think, for example, with Regen Network guys, like one thing that makes a lot of sense to me there is also, thinking about governance and who controls the network and the different stakeholders and stuff like that. And again, one of the challenges with something like Ethereum or some of these other designs is that, okay, you can have a dApp on Ethereum and it has its own governance, but then you always have the underlying governance of the platform, right? So you always have like these layers of governance systems, and of course you can easily have conflict. As you saw with the DAO, right, where you had maybe the DAO holders that had one idea and then the Ethereum holders, some of them agreed, some of them didn't, but you clearly had different groups of stakeholders that now, like conflicts will emerge. And I think, having this kind of sovereignty first approach just, I don't know, it just feels better to me.
Yeah, I mean, and then from the application standpoint, I think I think smart contracting platforms are great, like as long as they're used for exactly what they sound like, which is smart contracting, right? Like that's why I think ICOs and fundraisers took off on Ethereum, and they're the perfect use case because there's something that are pretty short-term use and need high levels of customizability, right? Like no ICO design was exactly the same, and so that short-term use and high customizability is what smart contracts are meant for. But then when you're trying to do much more high level much more advanced applications, I think like a DEX platform or prediction market platform, I think that's when you start to want more application specific state machines that you have much more control over and much more efficient than running on the EVM, for example. And also, so I was at the Scaling Ethereum workshop last week in Toronto, and there was this joke going on, basically trying with the Plasma Group people, and basically the idea, they were proposing let's just throw out ETH 2.0 and let's just take all of the data availability work that we've been putting into ETH 2.0 and apply it to Plasma, and we're going to call it sharded Plasma. And basically, the thing with Plasma is that it's somewhat limited in its capabilities. The Plasma Group has done this generalized Plasma concept that they've worked on quite a bit, and so they've definitely expanded the scope of Plasma well beyond what it was a year ago. It's not just the Plasma Cache thing with UTXOs. You can do much more things, but it's still limited. Basically, it's limited to things that that every piece of state has direct ownership at any given time. But I think 90% of DeFi use cases fall under this scenario. And so I was with Ben from Plasma Group, and we were just saying let's just focus on that for ETH 2.0, and then someone else asked what about the few applications that don't need that? They're just throw them in Cosmos. So I think that's actually a reasonable design pattern, things that need that can work in this Plasma. So essentially my entire pitch has been that all of these different hubs need to find specializations, right? And I think Ethereum acts as a perfect Plasma-based hub. Its focus should be on being the root chain for different Plasma constructions.
Do we want to talk about composability a little bit and the differences between? Well, I think it's composability there's composability on different levels, right? So composability within a chain like Ethereum and Cosmos and sort of differences there. But then also composability, I guess, in the future between different chains themselves. So between Cosmos and Ethereum, and how value and information could transit between those two systems. So maybe starting off with the differences, you addressed this a bit at the beginning, but between Ethereum and Cosmos and the trade-offs that Cosmos has made on composability.
I think the biggest thing is just the fact that you have to deal with so even on Ethereum, how they solved the composability issue was they basically created an ERC repo, and people proposed ERCs there. So for example, the most popular example of a composability design for Ethereum is the ERC20 standard, right? By creating the standard, we basically say, okay, now because all the tokens follow this standard, now I can actually integrate it with both Uniswap and 0x, and you get that composability in the ecosystem. And so that we're kind of starting to do that now with Cosmos in the ICS repo. So it stands for Interchain Standards, and so kind of we're putting into there a lot of these different kind of standards for how we expect to deal with different things. So the first one is going to be token transfers between chains, but then we'll start to add stuff like NFTs and Oracle data and identity information, and it'll just get more and more different types of standards being added into there. And then part of what makes the composability in Ethereum a little bit easier is that they all use a common VM, right? It's all everything is using Solidity, and so representing these interfaces and translating them is only you translate it from the spec in the ERC repo to Solidity. While in Cosmos we have to translate it from the spec in the ICS repo, we have to translate it to an SDK module. We have to translate it to an Aggarwal system. We have to translate it to an Ethermint system. We have to translate it to whatever new VMs come into the ecosystem. And so that process is definitely going to be more complex. And maybe one of the ways that, for example, because in Ethereum there's only that one VM, what happens is people do the interface in the ERC repo. So the ERC20 standard, right? All it defines is the names of the functions, And then the real implementation is basically always like, oh, you look at what's the standard in the Open Zeppelin repo, right? And that's like, okay, that's what the definition of ERC20 is now. But we don't really have that, and so now basically our specs have to be more explicit on like what the functionality of these different ICSs are.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, of course, also another thing that's just added complexity is that, you know, let's say if you look at Cosmos now and you want to build some application that spans multiple blockchains, now you have to worry about, you know, the different validator sets and what if one of them fails, or like if you have multiple hops, and so the security just becomes much more complicated, right? And the kind of game theoretic attacks and all of that stuff. So obviously Ethereum is nice in that way, in that you kind of don't have to worry about any of this. But yeah, that's just the trade-off, and I guess let's see how it all turns out.
Yeah, but like maybe in Ethereum 2.0, some of the game theoretic vulnerabilities will resurface in a different way. But yeah, I guess like Cosmos is composability is going to be high. Is going to be more challenging in Cosmos because of the reasons Sunny mentioned, right? So if you have something like KYC data, or you have NFT data, now you have a sending chain that's sending some NFT, a receiving chain. And both of these chains, ultimately they are getting like this stream of bytes, and now they have to interpret these bytes to mean NFT. And they have to agree on the interpretation of how these bytes translate into an NFT, how a stream of bytes translates into a token, how a stream of bytes maybe translates into a withdrawal message for a validator, right? So these agreements will need to happen, and different chains will need to like subscribe to these standard ways of translating bytes into these higher level financial objects. I think that's going to be one of the big tasks that emerges out of IBC.
Another challenge is the synchronicity as well, because you know, in Ethereum, the nice thing is that, you know, since everything is perfectly synchronous, you know, an event that happens in one contract can immediately call something, another contract, and can force it to do something. You know, the classic example, you know, essentially, you know, I mean, something I've chatting with the Agoric people about is that, like, look, in the system right now, you can take a CDP maybe and move it to another chain, and if you want to liquidate it, that's probably possible. But what if we get into the, but in Maker, what you also need is, you know, there needs to be mass liquidation events as well, because if the price of the collateral goes down, it needs to send out a message to all of the CDPs that are everywhere and say, oh, you need to liquidate right now, or if, or you know, or at least you got to, you know, re-up the CDP, or it's going to be liquidated. And so, like, you know, it's just a much more complex design pattern when you have to start to do these kind of things across these many chains, across these asynchronous environments.
Yeah, but I think one really interesting power that I find really interesting about the Cosmos SDK is that applications in the Cosmos SDK are autonomous in a way that Ethereum smart contracts are not. So, in an Ethereum smart contract, like a smart contract has some state, it is storing a bunch of things, and anytime you want to change it, an external user needs to like trigger this transaction, and the transaction will hit, and then there'll be a change. But the interesting thing about Cosmos chains is all of these applications can write application logic, which is, oh, every 100th block, like make this particular change to something. So I'll give you an example. So imagine like there's a zone, right? And that zone owns some address on the Cosmos hub, right? So it's like this whole zone, this whole network that's owning like this address on the Cosmos hub. And this zone owns atoms on the Cosmos hub. So like the region zone owns, let's say, 100,000 atoms on the Cosmos hub and delegates to Certus 1. Now, what is possible in the Cosmos SDK is for the region zone to have logic that every 1000 blocks of the region zone, it will try to withdraw its rewards on the Cosmos hub automatically. And basically every 1000 blocks, the region network will generate like this IBC packet, will flow over to the hub, and that IBC packet contains the instruction for withdrawing the rewards made by delegating to Certus1. And it like faithfully executes this every 1000 blocks without any external user of the region network trying to trigger this withdrawal, right? So this region application is like autonomous, right? Like it can do that autonomously. But this kind of thing is really hard to do in Ethereum. But like if one chain can do something like periodically autonomously, all of these chains can do that. So you can have like some kind of logic that is autonomous across multiple chains, right? Like this chain does this, and then 5 blocks later the other chain does something, and then 50 blocks later this third chain does something, and these 3 chains keep dancing continuously, and then some kind of higher level functionality is achieved in this particular way. So I think like this is kind of like different kind of composition that we might see in the Cosmos-based Internet of Blockchains. And yesterday I was talking to somebody from Polkadot, and it's possible that Polkadot will also have a something similar on their side. And I wonder what this is going to enable. So the way I tend to think of it is, Ethereum has smart contracts, but at Cosmos SDK we have decentralized bots. Right? We have like these decentralized bots that can run periodically and do something more than smart contracts. It's just not like Cosmos SDK is not the translation of just smart contracts. It's smart contracts, smart contract-like things, but also decentralized bots. And I find that really interesting.
I think we're going to have to spend a bit more time on this. How do we preserve neutrality as podcasters topic at the end?
Yeah.
I just want to say, like, while you were just talking about that, and like that, and the thing I mentioned about the like Ethereum sharded plasma idea, and something in my head just clicked for me. So this idea that the claim was that the sharded plasma design allows you basically anything that all state is owned by someone, that can all go onto plasma, and it's for everything else that let's throw it on Cosmos. Against Ethereum is that smart contracts are useless because almost every useful smart contract or like dApp requires some level of Oracle data, right? And so let's say your DAI on Ethereum is not secured by Ethereum because it's actually secured by the MKR holders, right? Because the security, even though Ethereum security might be high, if the MKR security is lower, then that's what it's actually secured by. Or let's say Augur, for example, right? It's not actually secured by Ethereum. Its security is the minimum, which is the rep holders, right? And so I think Cosmos just says, okay, let's just make that explicit and say, okay, if the security is lower bounded by the Oracle providers, let's just make those Oracle providers also be the validators of a sovereign chain. And I think that, I think that probably fits. I haven't thought through this enough to thought of it just now, but I think everything that can't go on Plasma essentially might need some sort of Oracle service to make it work, because they're the ones who are collectively holding the shared state. And so that might need to go onto a Cosmos chain, because then you just have those validators act as the oracles for the system.
And of course, like, this is not a property of like Cosmos SDK or like Polkadot substrate, but it's just like a weird feature I feel of proof of stake, that in proof of work, when you have a miner, there is no public key associated with a miner, right? Like, so the entire Bitcoin protocol as a whole can't own Ether, right? Because who would be the signatory for the Ether owned by the Bitcoin protocol? But it just feels like very interesting and fascinating that in proof of stake that's not the case, right? So when you have these 100 hub validators and you identify them with these public keys, these 100 hub validators could collectively own, tokens like Terra SDR on the Terra network. So the Atom, like the Cosmos Hub protocol can own Terra. Cosmos Hub protocol will be able to own like Kava USD. Cosmos Hub protocol will be able to own some derivative assets. And like Cosmos Hub governance will be able to exercise control over these assets. Right? And I feel like that's such a magical new capability added to crypto protocols just because these are proof of stake.
Do you think we'll start seeing hostile takeovers of chains between chains, or maybe a new job type, which is like a mergers and acquisitions banker for chains,
or Cosmos Hub can short itself.
Yeah.
I mean, so we did this Epicenter episode a couple of months ago now with Martin Koppelman and Matan Field about the DX DAO. And in that thing, he made this interesting pitch or statement, which is I think also the title of our Epicenter episode, which was this will be the biggest organization, or no, not biggest, most important organization in the world. You said biggest?
Yeah.
Okay, this will be the biggest organization in the world in 10 years.
I think there was a 1% chance or
1%
something.
chance.
Let's just put the context here for the statement.
But yeah, I think, and basically, his claim was that this DX DAO is starting off by running this, providing governance for the DutchX exchange that they built. But then over time, it's gonna become the operator, hopefully more and more DeFi systems as they get built, they'll say to the DX DAO, oh, we want you to govern this thing as well. I think fundamentally all proof of stake validator sets are just DAOs, right? But the difference between the Cosmos Hub validator set and the DX DAO is I think the Cosmos Hub validator set is a way more competent DAO. Not that the DX DAO isn't competent, but they haven't really done anything yet. Meanwhile, the Cosmos Hub validator set has successfully launched a billion-dollar network. They're able to run high security infrastructure, and so I think that just go listen to that entire Epicenter episode, and every spot that they say DX DAO, just replace it with Cosmos Hub.
Yeah. And then Zaki's idea takes this one level ahead, right? Like these validators, they naturally have this staking pool address. And so these validators and these delegators, you're also making them into DAOs naturally, right? Because
it's like sub-DAOs.
Sub-DAOs, right? Yeah. They're the main Cosmos Hub DAO, and
Sika DAO is essentially a sub-DAO of the Cosmos Hub DAO.
And we had child DAOs, right? There's implicitly there's a Certus DAO, implicitly there's a Dokia DAO, implicitly there's a Chorus DAO. It just exists. It will be put into code, and it will have this staking pool address, and it'll be able to own assets on other chains. And then you'll find applications, and these DAOs will branch off. These are seedlings that are already there. They're going to branch off, and the trees are going to erupt from these collections that have already begun. And it's going to be it's such a beautiful design, right? It's like DAOs all the way down, no?
Down.
I wanted to move on to another topic, which is something that you mentioned last time we were preparing for this. I really sort of started latching onto the idea of Cosmos at DEF CON in Cancun when you gave the talk where you sort of described the vision for Cosmos and where zones would be limited in functionality and that all the benefits that has in terms of security, etc. But you mentioned yesterday that it's possible that zones start sort of generalizing and progressively move towards VMization, I would say. How do you see this sort of this idea that zones should be either specific or tend towards generalization, and do you think that will happen?
I'm not really sure. One of the big questions that we're constantly having is how much stuff should go on the Cosmos Hub, right? we have one of the interns at Tendermint right now. He's working on implementing a Uniswap module in the Cosmos SDK. And so the question is like, should we put a Uniswap module on the Cosmos SDK? Like, it's kind of like quite a departure from like, if the Cosmos Hub is supposed to be very simplistic in like the state machine, we should not put it there, right? But at the same time, there's so many assets, I consider the Cosmos Hub as like this crossroad for the, like, all these trading routes going between it. And it's nice to have a like little, side of the road marketplace there where like, it's not going to be a full-fledged like order book DEX or something, but Uniswap is a very nice lightweight system, and so if people are quickly going through this Cosmos Hub, might as well stop at it's like Uniswap is kind of like the airport, like currency booth, where you're probably not getting the best prices, but it's good for like those quick trades that you need to do. And so, do we put that in the hub or not? And it's like kind of. I actually, I don't know the answer to this. Like, what goes in the hub, what doesn't, or just in general, any zone, right? Like, how do they decide how much to expand and what the trade-off between like generalization and maybe at some point we just start generalizing so much it just turns into everyone's just running an EVM again, or hopefully not the EVM, but hopefully a better VM and like and everyone just starts running that. I don't know.
So in biology, there is this idea of convergent evolution. So in like if you look at the tree of life, right? Like all life can be put into a tree, and there are like sub branches of the tree of life. So like like vertebrates, all of us, lizards, we are all vertebrates. We have one branch of tree of life. Cephalopods like squid, jellyfish, they are another branch of life. Arthropoda, insects, they are a third branch of life. There are many branches of life. Interesting thing is, all of these branches of life have evolved the eye independently of each other. Like, eyes have evolved in the vertebrate branch, so we have eyes. Eyes have evolved in the insect, like Arthropoda branch, like they have compound eyes with a different design. And they have evolved independently in the cephalopods. Eyes have evolved 8 times, right? Which means like there is something that is special about the eye, the notion, the concept of an eye itself, that life ends up evolving the eye. The same with wings, like wings have evolved like 4 or 5 times. Like reptiles have evolved wings, like mammals have evolved wings, like dinosaurs evolved wings and became birds. So like
bugs. Even
bugs, like insects have evolved wings. So like the question here is somewhat like, is Vitalik's idea of this general purpose VM that's like doing the smart contract computation, is it like the eye? Like no matter what point you start with, you're going to end up at it, right? I actually think that's true, because if I think of the Sikka DAO or the Chorus DAO, let's say. Now, Sikka DAO is going to have like, I don't know, 20,000 people that are the members of the DAO. Now, at some level, you don't want the evolution of the DAO to be constrained by the Sikka team. You want the ability for, if some member of this DAO has an intelligent idea, you want to give this member the ability to permissionlessly build their thing and be able to signal to the central Sikka team that, hey, this is an interesting thing to do with the Sikka DAO. And like, how do you give that capability? I think you give that capability by having something like a VM that's somehow attached to your main DAO logic. Right? So I feel like these VMs might be this point of convergent evolution. Like no matter where you start with, you will end up feeling the need for it.
Maybe it's like, kind of here's an example, right? We want all these staking derivatives on the Cosmos Hub, but it's like, we can trade those staking derivatives, but wouldn't it be nice if we can actually put like a VM on there, so maybe you can create like tranches of the for different staked atoms, and you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. And for that, you kind of maybe need a VM. So maybe if it does turn into a thing where everything needs a VM at some point, what maybe the end result of the Cosmos SDK is it's just a way, I'll use the EVM as an example, it's just a way for you to launch, everything turns into Ethermint, but the purpose of the Cosmos SDK is to make custom precompiles for your personal Ethermint, right? Everything has an EVM, and people are using the EVM, but the problem is the EVM is not great for building these large things. So, maybe I'll have my staking logic as a Cosmos SDK module that you'll call from the EVM as a precompile, and all your whatever your project is, maybe that core logic will be precompiled as SDK modules, and I don't know, that seems plausible.
I mean, kind of on that, with the Uniswap example, right? So yeah, you could put the Uniswap thing on the Cosmos Hub, which makes sense in some way. But also, if you think now all of these different chains connected to the Cosmos Hub and they're routing IBC packets through, like, I mean, with the scalability challenges of blockchain and the benefit of having higher performance purpose specific blockchains, it kind of makes sense to have it just for routing. But at the same time, you don't. Let's say the Cosmos Hub. There's a few things that are essential. Maybe it's like bridging to Ethereum, bridging to Bitcoin, having the Uniswap thing, maybe a bunch of other stuff. Like, you don't want to have 5 different staking tokens with their own communities and their own, that just gets too confusing, right? If I now have to route through a transaction from the Bitcoin to the Cosmos Hub and then do the Uniswap and go somewhere else, I have to worry about 4 different staking tokens and their own communities, right? So that doesn't feel natural. So I think it feels natural to have split that up over multiple chains, but probably have the same staking token for that.
The shared security design.
Yeah, something like, I mean,
Interchain collateralization.
I think the shared security thing kind of goes into a bunch of different directions. I think there's one which would be that, you're trying to basically use a bunch of functionality and it should just be done by one stakeholder group, and you don't want to have to reason about multiple staking tokens and economic incentives and all of that, right?
Well, what I'm more worried about is the latencies of IBC. So let's say I'm going from zone A to zone B, I want zone B token. I don't want to go to the hub, then to the Uniswap zone, then back to the hub, and then to zone B. It's the latency of IBC that I'm worried about here.
Yeah, sure, yeah, that will be a trade-off, right? The latency of IBC versus the scalability of these chains.
Yeah. I mean, that's my biggest thing where I think Interledger comes into play, where I think Interledger helps solve a lot of the latency issues with IBC.
Yeah, I tend to think that generalization would tend towards some form of centralization, or some network effects around networks. And we sort of saw this with Ethereum, right? Where Ethereum captured the majority of the sort of smart contract community and smart contract development. I think if there are 10, 20, 30 zones that end up having a general purpose smart contracting language or VM, a lot of those will probably end up not mattering very much, and you'll have one dominant one. Of course, unless this starts becoming part of the Cosmos Hub, at that point, then all these other zones stop mattering. But it kind of echoes the point that Jay made yesterday in the Q&A, which is you want to have systems that enable people to easily leave and exit towards something else if they feel that it no longer supports sort of their threshold for how centralized something is.
In the Sika DAO, I added the rage quit option from the Moloch DAO. So if you want, you get really mad in Sika DAO, you can burn your Sika DAO tokens and receive the proportional share of the assets of the DAO with some penalty, of a rage quit penalty. So I think we should be actively making sure we build in exit, be thinking about exit options when we build these systems.
There's so many other things that we had planned to cover here. So there's one more thing that before we sort of turn to the audience. And again, if you have questions at any point, you can just raise your hand, and the gentleman here with the mic will give you the mic. So with regards to zones starting to now build and will soon be launching on the hub, as validators, and I'm asking specifically to you guys because you're all validators, how do you see that sort of competing landscape playing out? Because zones will start competing for your attention and your validating power. I mean, we saw this a little bit at the dinner that you guys had. There were people there, and like, I'm here like trying to meet validators and pitch them my idea. How would you evaluate those projects and like make decisions about which zones you want to support? Is this something you've thought about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had the validator panel yesterday, and I think Hendrik made the point, which I think is perfectly correct, that it's almost like an investment decision, whether or not one directly invests money. One certainly invests a lot of time and resources, and I think with all of these projects, it's going to take a long time for them to succeed, and to build them out, and functionality to be there, and people start using it, or transaction fees to come in, and maybe there's some token, but right now there's maybe no liquidity, your value is unclear, right? So you always have to take some kind of like bet on the future of that project. And so then of course you have to look at exactly the same thing that probably investors look at. Okay, does this vision make sense? Is the team good? Are they serious about it? Will they work on it for a long time? Do they have the resources to build it? So I think there's all of those things. There's obviously also the question of just how hard is it to run that network. And then certainly if people build on Cosmos SDK, that makes it easier.
So I mean, there's a technical side, and then there's the business side, right? So if you onboard a new network, I mean, the business side is very clear, right? You'll have to go and market to this community, and it's going to cost you effort. And maybe that's the larger cost. Right? On the technical side, last year, when building the validator, I almost had like a crisis of confidence. I was like, the validator is a damn commodity, right? Like all of these networks, the validators are just going to be the same, and we're going to just keep on replicating the same. And because it's all the same, this is going to be a commodity. I had a crisis of faith like that. And the interesting thing is like this year, every network is subtly different technically. So Cosmos Hub, okay, how the validators on Cosmos Hub work. On Terra, we have validators on Terra. On Terra, we are building a price oracle. Right? We have to invest effort into building this price oracle and like securing this price oracle. Because for the stablecoin, they need prices, and we are supplying the prices, the Terra network. I hear like on the Kava network, we are going to need to do parameter setting, and this parameter setting is going to be complex. So we will need to develop an algorithm to help the network set these parameters. That's custom effort. Another network we're working with, Solana. Solana is an oddball altogether. RHSFs are too slow for Solana. They need GPUs to do signature verification. There's no point building a high availability solution in Solana because that network wants to run so fast that a high availability solution will not work. There's a ton of custom effort for Solana. So while I initially felt all of the technical costs for onboarding new networks were going to be very low, in practice it's not behaving like that, at least this year. Now, maybe the future is that we'll build a bunch of 25 tools, price oracle, this, that, and then the next network you throw at us will be able to use that tool, and then the onboarding cost will fall. Or maybe it never falls. Maybe every new network is its own beast, and it will need this custom thing, and there's always going to be technical onboarding cost. So there's definitely a business onboarding cost. There might be always a high technical onboarding cost. And if both exist together, then you have to be very picky with the networks you onboard. Yeah.
So now we've got 10 minutes left.
I want to ask a question from the audience about
go ahead.
onboarding cost. So I guess I don't understand in the technical, I kind of get that, but in terms of the business onboarding cost, let's say some random project comes up to you, and let's say they're running everything pretty standard Cosmos SDK, so the technical onboarding cost is not that much. For the business one, let's say you don't really care to advertise or get engaged with their community. You have a reputation from your Cosmos Hub validation that you validate correctly, run the code correctly. You look at their code, maybe you audit it, or maybe you just run it in a VM. I mean, AWS doesn't audit all the code that runs on their system. So I'm wondering, like if you don't really care about like kind of getting deeply involved in a certain community, like what are the onboarding costs really in terms of like the business onboarding costs that you discussed?
I mean, I guess the point is that you can't, I think you do, I mean, I think what Brian's point was that you should, have some care of like getting involved with the community, or, you at least have to have some level of faith in the project, because what you are investing is your time, and, trade your money for your time, for more time always, right? And so, the investment of time that we're putting in, and like what Mahir said, every system usually designing requires like a time investment because they're all slightly different. And so, I think the community of a project is something that you should, be deeply involved with, or at least familiar with when you're making a decision about, because that's probably one of the biggest factors of the success of the project, and you shouldn't be validating on it if you don't at least have some belief in the success of the project.
Yeah, and sort of to your question, I mean, at least in the kind of Cosmos staking design, maybe there will be different, I'm sure there will be different design, like Polkadot, for example, has a kind of a different design, but in the Cosmos design, you have this connection between staking and governance, right? So if you as a validator, you have this like significant responsibility to be engaged in the governance, to follow it, things like that. So if you're gonna like validate on some chain that like, okay, maybe it's easy to sort of have it run and like sign a thing, but like you don't really know or care about the community or what it's for. I mean, I don't think it's going to be good for these networks, right? Like I think they will struggle because they'll have like basically stakeholders who don't care and not engaged. And then if something goes wrong, right, it's still your responsibility, right? Like maybe that works fine as long as everything works fine, but at some point it's not going to work fine anymore. Then you have to deal with it, right? Because you can't just I think that would be your responsibility. So I think that there is that cost.
Yes, so you'd say validators are more responsible for the blockchains, much more responsible than somebody like AWS is for applications running their system.
Yeah, certainly, right? I mean, AWS is not going to make any decision about like the future of your application, right? But validators, again, at least in the Cosmos design, do. I mean, if you had some sort of different staking design where maybe have like in Polkadot, right, this kind of governance council and they make the decisions and that's a different group of stakeholders and you literally just are responsible for like running the code and then maybe it is different, right? Like maybe it doesn't have to be like that for all of the chains.
Also, I mean, AWS doesn't hold equity in the companies that use AWS, while Cosmos validators have some sort of stake in the networks that they're validating.
That's a choice, right?
Well, I mean, if you don't, then it's very hard to get delegation on those chains. And also, if you want to get delegation, that's another reason you have to be active in those communities.
So I'd like to open it up now to like sort of general questions about anything we've discussed here. If you have any questions about the podcast or you want to ask us specifically, go ahead.
It's been pretty obvious these days that a lot of projects are on the lookout for validators. So I wanted to hear your opinion about the exact time when they pitch you the vesting schedules. How do you feel about vesting schedules? Like they're really struggling to keep the validators involved for long periods. So how do you see that for newly spun up zones or hubs?
You mean if they have some sort of vesting for like investors or for like tokens that validators earn through like operating the network? Or?
Yeah.
I haven't actually seen that, I think. And there's obviously the thing about like, you're investing or somebody is doing some token sale and now of course there are various projects trying to do sort of validator specific token sales, which I think makes it makes sense. Of course, it can be a challenge, right? Because many validators are not funds. Most validators are not funds, so they don't necessarily have like the resources to buy tokens. But yeah, then obviously I think the idea of like giving, let's say some discounted price, but there's some lockup and things like that. I think that makes perfect sense. And in general, having vesting on token sales, I'm all in favor of it.
Do you think validators are going to inevitably have to become funds? Like for Sigma, we have a partnership with Decrypt Capital, and that's kind of how we like make that work. But like,
yeah. Well, on some level, I do think they naturally evolve into fund-like structures, because even if like let's say you're running a validator on Cosmos, then you have some atoms and revenues. Now probably you're gonna have to like liquidate, some percentage, maybe a lot to cover your costs. But if you have any kind of profit, then these will be in tokens now, and then maybe you have a bunch of other tokens and other chains. So you started having to manage these different positions, right? So that becomes a factor of figuring out like when you liquidate what. And then, quite naturally, you would build up some sort of balance sheet of tokens. And then, of course, at some point, maybe not now, but maybe in 2 or 3 years, if this succeeds, and if these companies succeeds, that they would be in a position to invest kind of funding rounds, and so I do think it kind of naturally goes in that direction.
cool.
Yeah, cool. The idea, you talked this morning about the concept of the validator being like somehow like either a DAO or a fund, so you're kind of like switching different ideas, and I'm thinking about like, what do you guys think about like a second level governance, kind of like the proposals, with this concept of having the address for the validator, the Zaki, that really kind of like mixed up a lot of things. So what about like some like sort of like sub-level of governance? Is something useful, not useful, good, not good? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I didn't.
The delegators being able to vote.
Oh,
Yes,
Delegators of
like
A
same way
value.
that validators can like do proposals and with bonded proposal, not just like do things, but just like I put the skin in the game, what I'm saying, what I'm proposing, and I get slashed. The same concept. Do you think this can be also applied like to the second level, like sub?
Right.
So just one thing on the Cosmos Hub though, really quick, like, it's not just validators that can make proposals and vote and deposit. All delegators and all staked atom holders can, participate in governance.
Yeah.
And, any delegator, currently validators inherit the vote of their delegators, but delegators can always override their validators. So,
But on the matters of like, we're like the concept of having like the single address for the whole delegators kind of like creates like, not tribalism because that's a bad word, but kind of like creates like a community, which is the opposite. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, do you think that there will be space also to give a voice, actual voice to that community? That's my thought.
Yeah. I mean, I think for Chorus One, when we created our interesting thing is like last year, back in April, we created a Slack which is Chorus One community, because we thought like these delegators, they are a community. Not many people came, right? And then we created a Telegram channel. What do you name it? We named it Chorus One community, right? And then now we have like 250 people on that Telegram channel and they are posting. Now we're going to get an address. I think it's only logical that there is some way for these delegators to signal to us what they want out of a validator. I don't know what they'll signal about, maybe in the beginning. I think like the use case doesn't exist right now. Like what do the delegators exactly signal us about? But I think something will emerge where it will make a lot of sense to further deepen this community.
Yeah, I think that if you look at the way that proposals get submitted now, like a lot of there's this, and this was mentioned yesterday, like discussions happen in a lot of different places, like on forums, on Telegram, etc. And then like the final decision and the final signaling ends up being the proposal. like there could be, I think, different layers of granularity there where you can have some form of automated or like organized, orchestrated signaling, where like if you're going to post like a draft or like a pre-draft of a proposal, you can already kind of post it and start getting people to, in a more tangible way and like some form of stake, like signal their.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, of all of the podcasts that we've done, I think the one that always remains in my mind the most is the one we did with CZ about Binance. And the thing that stands out to me there is really that you have this enormous blurring between the customer and the company, right? It's sort of kind of all the same a little bit. And I think that's just enormously powerful. And so even though maybe it's not like a sort of DAO in the sense that we think about it traditionally in the blockchain space, right, that it's like all on chain and smart contracts and stuff, you can think of Binance a little bit like a DAO. And I think why did it grow in this meteoric way and become so hyper successful so quickly? It's because of that, in my view at least. Or that's a huge factor to it. I think all successful organizations in the future will look like that, or the most successful ones will. And so I think that absolutely ties into that. So I think all of the customers, delegators are like community. And I think the more that one can sort of give them deeper stake and involvement, the better. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about how to do that. Is like the biggest obstacle is always legal issues. So that's the sort of challenge for exactly how to make it happen. But like I think like we very much want to go as much as we can in this direction, and I think that's the inevitable future of organizations in general.
Also, so like this is kind of one of the things I'm trying to do with the Sika DAO is that I'm not committing that like, I will vote exactly the way that the DAO says, but any decisions I will kind of use the DAO as an advisory thing at the very least, where it says that like, okay, here's a way for you to signal what you think, and I'll obviously take that into heavy consideration.
Final question, perhaps? That was the last one? Okay, well, thank you for taking part in our very first live podcast. And so this will go out on our feed next week. So if you're not yet a subscriber to the Epicenter podcast, please go to epicenter.tv/subscribe. You can also find us on iTunes or anywhere you get your podcasts. Thank you.